Get out of my courtroom now, or you'll regret it. These were the words that Judge Harris barked across the room on that cold Tuesday morning, March 14th. 2023 at exactly 9:42 a.m. in the downtown courthouse on 7th Street in Savannah, Georgia. I spent 3 long years preparing every document, every evidence, every witness statement, meticulously filing everything in bright yellow folders, labeled meticulously from A to Z, and in that very moment when my entire life of dedication and sacrifice seemed to be dismissed with a wave of his gavel. I felt the weight of humiliation crash down on me. The polished oak floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ink, and the murmurs of the 20 spectators seated in the gallery created a low hum of tension and curiosity. I glanced around, seeing faces frozen in disbelief, some whispering into cell phones, recording the moment, while others pressed their hands to their mouths in shock. My hands trembled, slightly gripping the mahogany rail in front of me. I had invested exactly $21, $763.84 from my personal savings to secure expert testimony and forensic analysis. And to think that in exactly 15 minutes I would either be vindicated or completely crushed. I had never imagined that a single phrase could carry such absolute dismissal. My assistant Clara, who had been by my side since 2018, whispered nervously, "I can't believe," he said, that her fingers drummed anxiously against her leather-bound notebook. The courtroom clock ticked loudly, marking each second with ruthless precision. The walls, adorned with faded portraits of former judges, seemed to stare down at us, judging my every move. The scent of her coffee lingered slightly as she passed it to me, hoping for some comfort. The temperature in the room was cool, but my stomach churned with anxiety and anger. I could hear the soft rustle of papers and the scratch of pens. As the clerks made their notes, every detail mattered. Every sound, every glance, every micro-expression could become crucial later in the day. A young man in the back recorded everything on his iPhone, whispering excitedly, "This is insane. Nobody expected this." And the tension was electric. The contrast between my years of careful preparation and the casual cruelty of the judge was unbearable. Yet I knew deep down that something significant was about to happen. I had seen injustice before in the small town of Marietta, Georgia, where I had grown up, watching neighbors ignored by the system. But nothing compared to this cold official dismissal. The promise that in 15 minutes everything would change kept my heart pounding and my mind racing. I remembered my father telling me when I was 12 in our small kitchen, smelling the bacon frying and the sweet aroma of fresh biscuits. Never let anyone make you feel small because of what you know or what you work for. Those words echoed now as I tried to steady my breathing. The wooden benches creaked as the next witness was called, and I could feel the energy in the room shift. The gallery leaned forward, their eyes wide, capturing every detail. My shoes pressed against the cold marble floor. I could feel the texture of the tiles in my thin socks, and the chill traveled up my legs. A slight draft from the cracked window made the papers in my folders flutter. I glanced at the clock again, 9:45, and the words of Judge Harris replayed in my mind, "Get out of my courtroom now, or you'll regret it." And I whispered to myself, quietly but firmly, "Not today, not this time, not without a fight." You see, in that moment, everything hung in the balance. Every second felt stretched and heavy. The echo of my voice from years of training in debate and law classes in Savannah College of Law resonated within me, reminding me that preparation counts, that detail matters, that resilience is built over decades. And in the gallery, a woman in her 70s with a bright floral dress held her hand over her mouth, whispering to her husband, "Can you believe?" This, my pulse quickened, thinking about the hundreds of hours I had spent reviewing exhibits, the smell of printer ink and paper glue still lingering on the documents. I had meticulously crafted every signature, notarized every margin, checked every date, verified. The anticipation was unbearable and yet electric. Every person in that room seemed suspended in time, waiting for what would come next. The assistant district attorney shuffled papers with a smirk, clearly confident in the dismissal, clearly unaware that the scales of justice were not as simple as they believed. My lips pressed together. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, thump, 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 the sound mingling with the scratching of pens, and the soft cough of a nervous juror. The sensation of polish went under my palms, and the cool air on my face reminded me that this was real, this was happening, and that in exactly 15 minutes everything could flip. And I whispered to Clara, "Do you feel it?" She nodded, slightly gripping her. Notebook tighter, the fluorescent lights flickered briefly, casting momentary shadows across the room, highlighting the tension on Judge Harris's face. The glare from the windows reflected off the polished floor, creating bright streaks that made my eyes water slightly, and the gallery collectively held their breath in anticipation. I took a slow breath, smelling the faint aroma of cleaning solution mixed with coffee and paper glue, focusing on the tactile sensation of the folder edges under my fingers. Trying to channel every ounce of concentration, every lesson learned, every late night spent in libraries studying precedents, the hum of the air conditioning mingled with distant traffic outside, and the rustling whispers of observers recording everything for social media created a surreal atmosphere. And in that moment, I realized that this was more than a courtroom. This was a stage. This was a test of everything I had worked for, and I thought to myself, if you have ever been dismissed, ignored, or humiliated like this, comment below. Tell me your story, because you are not alone. And as the clock ticked 9:50 and the anticipation was unbearable and the sense of impending revelation pressed on everyone present, every nerve on edge, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama, and never had I felt such a mixture of dread and hope. The contrast between the judge's dismissive tone and the meticulous preparation I had invested over 3 long years, totaling hundreds of billable hours and thousands of dollars in personal expenses, made the injustice sting even more. And yet, I knew something was coming, something that would stop everyone in their tracks, that would freeze every person in that room and reveal the truth of who really held power in that courtroom. The energy was electric, and I could almost feel the shift in the air, as if the very walls were bracing for revelation to come. And I whispered under my breath, stay ready, stay sharp, because in 15 minutes, no one will know what hit them. I had spent nearly 30 years of my life building a reputation in Savannah, Georgia, starting in 1993, when I opened my small law office on 12th Street in a brick building painted pale yellow with green trim. I remember the smell of fresh paint mixed with sawdust and floors still damp under my shoes, and the faint aroma of the coffee from the cafe next door, where I would go every morning at precisely 7:15 a.m. to order a dark roast with cream and sugar. I had started with only $5,000 in savings. From my first job delivering newspapers at the age of 15, I had worked weekends and summer vacations, earning every cent folding newspapers and counting change at the corner of Liberty Avenue. The lessons I learned from those early years stayed with me: the discipline, the patience, the recognition that every detail mattered. And when I became a lawyer, I carried that same meticulous approach into every case I ever touched. I remember the first time I donated pro bono work to an elderly widow in Marietta. Her home on Maple Street, modest but tidy. She had a small garden with tulips that smelled faintly of spring rain. I spent over 40 hours reviewing her paperwork and negotiating with the bank to prevent foreclosure. The smile on her face when she walked out, knowing her home was safe, reminded me why I had chosen this path. I had also funded local community programs over the years, exactly $12,450 in 2019 to refurbish the library on Pine Street, adding new computers and chairs to children. They would run their fingers over the smooth plastic of keyboards and gasp at the vivid colors of the books on the shelves. The joy in their voices was priceless. Yet despite all this dedication, the first signs of disrespect toward me had started subtly 5 years ago, when a colleague dismissed my suggestions at a meeting at the Georgia Bar Association. The meeting room smelled faintly of stale coffee and carpet polish, and I remember the sharp click of my pen as I jotted notes, trying to remain calm. They laughed quietly under their breath, ignoring the expertise I had built over decades. The whispers of colleagues echoing across the room like a low hum that gnawed at my confidence. Little by little, I noticed a pattern of being underestimated at court hearings, every gesture scrutinized, every proposal challenged unnecessarily. In March 2017, I spent exactly 36 hours preparing a case involving the estate of a longtime client, Mrs. Thompson, who had passed away, leaving $87,342 in assets to her grandchildren. I meticulously documented every signature, every bank record, and notarized every page. Yet the hearing Judge Reynolds dismissed my objections as if they were trivial. I remember the metallic taste of stress in my mouth and the sound of the gavel hitting the podium like a hammer striking steel. My hands were clammy, and I could feel the fine fibers of the courtroom carpet against my shoes as I shifted nervously. I even tried to address the issue privately with the judges, but was met with cold indifference. I spent nights awake thinking about the injustice, reviewing transcripts on my desk. At exactly 10:37 p.m., the soft glow of my desk lamp highlighting every word While the scent of old paper filled the room, I remember my mother telling me, when I was a teenager in our small house on Oak Street in Marietta, never let anyone diminish your effort or your generosity. Those words resonated deeply because they reminded me that every sacrifice I had made, from the $3.500 I spent on continuing legal education in 2015 to the personal hours spent mentoring young lawyers, had meaning even if some refused to see it. And my investment was not only financial, it was emotional. I had given my energy, my patience, and my integrity to every case. And every client, the smells, the sights, the tactile sensations of preparing documents and walking the marble floors of courthouses across Georgia were all part of the ritual that grounded me. The first hints of overt disrespect came subtly at first. In 2020, during a probate case in Augusta, Georgia, when opposing counsel openly mocked my years of experience at exactly 2:16 p.m. in a wood panel conference room smelling faintly of polish and coffee, he sneered, saying, "Oh, come on, you've been doing this for decades, and you still can't get it right." My heart sank. I felt the sting of humiliation as I adjusted my tie and gripped the edge of the conference table, the polished surface smooth under my fingertips, my assistant whispering quietly behind me, "Do you want me to respond?" I shook my head, trying to maintain dignity. The walls seemed to close in around me, the echo of laughter and the faint ticking of the wall clock marking each second of my growing frustration. I knew then that the challenges ahead would be greater than I had imagined, because they were not just legal, they were personal. They were attacks on every investment I had made emotionally, financially, and socially over decades, yet I kept my focus on preparation and integrity because I understood that the power of persistence was stronger than the arrogance of ignorance. I spent hours reflecting on my early years in Savannah, remembering the smells of the bakery on River Street, where I had spent Saturday mornings buying pastries for my clients, the warmth of the ovens mixing with the crisp March air and the laughter of neighbors sharing memories in the streets. These memories reminded me of why I persisted and why every small act of generosity and attention to detail mattered. I recalled one evening precisely at 8:23 p.m. sitting in my office with a half-empty cup of chamomile tea smelling faintly of herbs and honey, thinking about the thousands of dollars donated to local charities, the hours spent reviewing case files for pro bono clients, and the countless conversations with students mentoring them through the challenges of legal practice. And yet the injustice persisted. My contributions were ignored, my dedication dismissed, and my presence underestimated even in my own community. I could hear Clara typing softly at her desk, the click of keys, a rhythm that contrasted with the slow, deliberate ticking of the wall clock, the gallery of faces from past cases flashing through my memory, some smiling, grateful, others indifferent. Yet the cumulative weight of those experiences shaped me into someone who understood both vulnerability and hidden power. The anticipation of the upcoming hearing in Savannah downtown courthouse was now layered with decades of context, sacrifices unnoticed, and generosity ignored, all coalescing into a tense buildup that everyone present would feel soon. And I whispered to myself, what would it take for them to finally see the truth? What would it take for justice to be undeniable? And I glanced at Clara and whispered, quietly, prepare yourself, because the world is about to witness not just the story of a case, but the story of a life spent giving everything and being underestimated. And if you have ever felt your contributions ignored or your dedication dismissed, comment below, because this story is for all of us who have persevered through invisibility and silent injustice. And as the morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows, highlighting the polished floor and the faces of spectators, I felt the weight of history pressing down, knowing that in the next chapter everything would escalate and the world would watch as the tension and humiliation that had been building for decades reached its inevitable crescendo. By 10:12 a.m. in the downtown Savannah courthouse, the atmosphere had thickened with tension. The polished marble floors gleaming under fluorescent lights reflected not only the looming crowd, but the mounting dread I could feel in every fiber of my being. The smell of fresh coffee from the nearby cafe, mixed with the faint odor of old wood and paper glue from the courtroom documents I had meticulously prepared over 3 years, totaling $21,763.84 in expenses and over 500 hours of personal dedication. Every witness statement notarized, every exhibit labeled with precision, and yet the humiliation continued unabated. I had just handed over Exhibit B, the set of documents proving fraudulent mismanagement of the Thompson estate, when opposing counsel Richard Landers, a man in his late 40s with a slick gray suit and a faint cologne that smelled like citrus, and leather, leaned back in his chair, smirking, and whispered, loud enough for the nearest spectators to hear. Well, it looks like someone spent more on stationery than substance, and a ripple of laughter echoed to the courtroom like cruel waves, slapping at my resolve. I gritted my teeth, feeling the cool edge of the wooden rail under my palms, my knuckles turning white. But I held my posture steady. The gallery shifted uneasily, murmurs running like soft winds through the rows of spectators. A woman in her 70s, wearing a bright floral dress covering her trembling hands, whispered to her husband, "Can you believe this?" The arrogance was palpable, the sound of Lander's pen scratching against his legal pad, every so often a mocking rhythm that seemed to underline his derision, only fueled my awareness of the injustice. Yet I attempted to remain composed. I spoke clearly to the judge, trying to address the inaccuracies. "Your Honor, I carefully reviewed the bank statements from March 2019 to February 2022, and the discrepancies are quantifiable down to the last cent. $87, $342.16 was mishandled over that period." The air felt cooler against my neck as I gestured toward the evidence, hoping to draw attention to the meticulous nature of my documentation. Judge Harris crossed his arms, his expression unreadable, but his eyes cold. The murmurs in the gallery growing louder, the hum of cameras recording every moment, creating a collective pulse of anticipation. I could feel the energy vibrating through the room, my own heartbeat matching the rhythm of clicks and whispers. In the gallery at 10:25, M. Landers stood and pointed directly at me, saying with a tone dripping contempt, "You've clearly spent decades learning law, but you've clearly missed the forest of the trees." His words cut like a blade, and I could see the faces of the spectators freezing as though suspended in disbelief. The cool marble floor under my shoes felt like ice against my skin, and I felt the weight of every eye in the room following my reaction. I spoke calmly yet firmly. "Your Honor, if I may, the evidence presented clearly indicates mismanagement." The assistant DA glanced at me, raising an eyebrow and whispering, "Clara, do you want me to intervene?" She shook her head and scribbled notes, the scent of her chamomile tea lingering faintly. As she exhaled sharply through her nose, every subtle movement became amplified. In that confined space, the series of humiliations escalated further when Landers pulled out a set of photos at exactly 10:33 and showing what he claimed were unauthorized transactions from 2018. The color of the ink on the documents vivid against the stark white paper like red flags warning of failure. He waved them in front of the judge and stated loudly, clearly intended to provoke, "Oh, look at this. Your meticulous records don't match reality." The gallery gasped, and a young man at the back recording on his iPhone whispered excitedly, "This is insane." The cold metallic taste of panic briefly filled my mouth as I remained standing, my posture rigid, my mind racing to strategize. Every move, every word, every gesture now mattered more than ever. The witnesses in the room began to murmur, some clutching their purses, others raising phones to record everything. The echoes of past injustices from Augusta, Georgia, 2020, and Marietta, 2017, flooded my mind. The smell of stale coffee and polish from those courthouses mixing with the present moment, creating a visceral memory. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands pressed against the smooth edges of the railing, the texture grounding me as I mentally cataloged every humiliation that had occurred, from subtle dismissals to overt mockery. The turning point was at 10:47, and when Landers laughed openly after I presented a signed affidavit from an expert showing the mismanagement was undeniable. He said sarcastically, "Well, congratulations. You found someone to write you a letter. How impressive." I clenched my fists under the desk, my fingers pressing into the leather chair, my eyes scanning the courtroom, every face frozen in shock or discomfort, the energy of collective indignation mounting. "Clara," whispered softly. Wilson breathed, and I nodded, knowing that I needed to remain strategic, calm, and focused, even as the room seemed to close in around me. The polish wood under my palms, the faint smell of ink and paper glue, all heightened my senses, as if every element of the courtroom conspired to remind me of my vulnerability. The gallery of spectators seemed to swell with emotional resonance. At exactly 10:53 a.m., a man, filming on his smartphone in the back, whispered, "Hey, everyone is seeing this. He really thinks he's untouchable," capturing the arrogance and the mounting tension. And in that moment, I realized the humiliation was not merely personal. It was systemic. It was embodiment of every slight I had endured since starting my practice. The mockery, the dismissals, the underestimations, every calculated snub and casual disregard for my years of dedication, all coalescing into a crescendo that demanded response. I took a deep breath, feeling the texture of the courtroom folders beneath my fingers, a faint smell of my coffee lingering from earlier, and the low hum of whispered recording voices. As I steadied myself, knowing that the line had been crossed and that tolerance had reached its limit, I could see the shock in the faces of elderly spectators, the subtle tightening of fists among my peers, and the muted gasps from young law students observing the spectacle, the combination of physical sensations of sensory overload, and the mounting injustice crystallized my decision I would not remain passive any longer. The series of escalating humiliations witnessed by the community, recorded for public view and steeped in personal and professional investment, had set the stage for a shift, a turning point that everyone would feel. And as I glanced at Clara, she met my eyes with understanding and determination, and I whispered, "Prepare yourself, because the moment we act, everything they thought they knew will be shattered, and what would follow would force even the most arrogant to confront the truth." And if you have ever been subjected to repeated humiliation or injustice, comment below, because you are not alone, and the next chapter will reveal the moment when patience turns into decisive action, and the hidden power comes to light as the courtroom air thickened with anticipation, and the gallery leaned forward, collectively waiting for the inevitable transformation. By 11:03 a.m. in the downtown Savannah courthouse, the tension had reached a palpable thickness, my palms still pressed against the smooth edges of the polished oak railing, the faint smell of coffee and paper glue filling my nostrils. As I took a deep, deliberate breath, I realized that the humiliation and injustice I had endured for decades had brought me to a moment of clarity, a strategic awakening that would determine the course of not just this hearing, but the perception of every person in the room. My eyes scanned the gallery, noting the expressions of shock and discomfort in the faces of spectators and witnesses alike, the hum of cameras recording every subtle movement, creating a collective anticipation that vibrated to the polished marble floors under my shoes, the faint texture of the carpeted witness stand brushing against my calves, grounding me as I mentally cataloged the escalating abuses and dismissals that had occurred from 1993 to the present, from the small office on 12th Street in Savannah, where I had started with $5,000 in savings, to the precise $21,763.84, spent over 3 years preparing this case. Every detail of my life's work had been ignored, belittled, or mocked, and yet in that very moment, I understood the power I had quietly cultivated over decades. The first clue came from the detailed financial audits I had prepared between 2018 and 2022, meticulously documenting every cent of mismanagement totaling $87,342.16, and the network of colleagues and legal experts I had mentored and supported, who now silently watched in the gallery with expressions of restrained admiration and quiet anticipation. At exactly 11:08 a.m., I whispered softly to Clara, who stood at my side, clutching her leather-bound notebook, the smell of chamomile tea still faintly on her breath. "Are you ready?" She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together, a slight nod of agreement, conveying a shared understanding. The atmosphere in the courtroom felt charged, as if the very walls were aware of the impending shift. The hum of whispered conversations and the click of recording devices intensified my focus, my hands adjusting the folders with a tactile precision, as if the texture itself carried energy and guidance. I remember my father's words in that small kitchen on Oak Street in Marietta, the smell of fresh biscuits and bacon frying filling the room. He had told me, never let anyone make you feel small. Because of what? You know what you've worked for, and now, decades later, those words crystallized into a strategic decision, a conscious resolve to act not from anger, but from deliberate preparation. At 11:12 a.m., I leaned slightly forward, presenting the first piece of evidence I had saved for this precise moment, a notarized statement from a financial auditor confirming the misappropriation of funds with exact figures, $87,342.16 over 36 months. The gallery collectively gasped, some whispering among themselves, filming with phones and tablets, capturing every second, the faint aroma of printer ink mixing with the lingering scent of my coffee. As I spoke calmly, "Your Honor, if I may, the discrepancies outlined in these documents are not speculative. They are precise and verifiable." The assistant did raise an eyebrow, silently impressed at the confidence I projected. Every micro gesture calculated, every word deliberate, the polished surface of the railing under my fingers grounding me. As I prepared for the next step, I felt the weight of decades of professional experience and personal sacrifice converge into a single point of resolve, and at 11:17 a.m., I presented the final piece, a set of emails and contracts meticulously time-stamped between 2019 and 2022, demonstrating deliberate mismanagement and concealment. The fluorescent lights reflected sharply off the polished floor, highlighting every expression in the gallery, the faces frozen in shock and disbelief, the collective energy electric. I could feel the subtle vibrations through the marble under my shoes, the tactile Sensation, a reminder the stakes involved. Lander's smug smile faltered slightly as he glanced at the documents. The faint scent of his cologne, a mix of citrus and leather, now almost suffocating the tension of the room. I maintained a steady gaze on Judge Harris, his eyes narrowing slightly, but now showing the first flicker of uncertainty. The hum of whispered speculation grew louder at 11:22 a.m. I whispered quietly to Clara. Every detail is falling into place. She exhaled softly, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook as if to draw courage from the texture. The shift was undeniable. A subtle energy rippled past the courtroom as the balance of power quietly began to tilt. The turning point was complete, not through anger or vengeance, but through meticulous preparation, strategic timing, and unwavering composure. The air felt charged with potential. The faint hum of the courthouse ventilation, mingling with the whispers and clicks of recording devices, creating a symphony of anticipation. As I straightened my posture and prepared to deliver the next move, I felt a calm determination wash over me. Decades of underestimation and dismissals coalescing into clarity. The hidden power I had cultivated through years of dedication and quiet influence, now ready to manifest the next step in this confrontation. And if you have ever reached a moment in life where clarity and determination replaced humiliation, comment below, because you will understand the feeling of quiet but unstoppable empowerment. And as the gallery leaned forward, every eye fixed on me, every witness holding their breath, I could feel the cool air against my skin, the polish with the railing firm under my fingers, and the faint smell of paper and coffee guiding me into the decisive moment to calm before the storm. The moment when patience turns into action, when strategy overtakes anger, and when hidden power begins to reveal itself. A stage was set, the audience unaware that everything they believed about control and authority was about to be shattered. And in that silent anticipation, I whispered internally, this is the moment. Everything changes, and the next chapter will reveal the revelation that no one in that courtroom saw coming. At exactly 11:31 a.m. in the downtown Savannah courthouse, the room seemed to hold its breath, the polished marble floors reflecting every anxious and curious face, the faint smell of coffee lingering from the morning mingling with the sharp ink aroma of documents. As I slowly opened the folder containing the final evidence, the air seemed to hum with anticipation, my fingers brushing over the smooth paper edges, every crease familiar from months of preparation, and the gallery leaning forward. Collectively, as if drawn by some invisible force, I cleared my throat softly and addressed Judge Harris. Your Honor, I believe the full scope of mismanagement has not yet been revealed. And as I spoke, I handed over a series of notarized contracts, bank statements, and correspondence totaling exactly 428 pages, each meticulously annotated, every date, verified every signature, confirmed every transaction, accounted for down to the last cent. $87, $342.16 spread across 36 months. The assistant DA and Landers both froze, their expressions flickering from smug confidence to startled uncertainty. The gallery collectively gasped, some whispering frantically, capturing every moment on their smartphones. A young man in the back muttered, "This is insane, this is unreal," and the tension in the room, thick in the smell of fresh coffee from the cafe nearby, seemed suddenly overwhelming, mixed with a subtle scent of cleaning solution and old wood from the courtroom. The moment was electric, and I spoke again. Calmly but firmly, these documents revealed that the mismanagement was not an accident, but deliberate and coordinated from multiple parties. Expressions on Lander's face betrayed the first cracks of arrogance, fading, his shoulders tensing slightly, as if he suddenly understood the gravity of what was unfolding. And at that exact moment, I presented the key evidence, a notarized email chain dated March 12th. 2021, between Landers and a senior executive in Savannah, demonstrating intent to conceal funds and manipulate records. Of fluorescent lights flickered briefly, highlighting the shock etched across the gallery. Every eye fixed on the screen as I read aloud excerpts word for word with deliberate precision. I quote here, and I quote verbatim, their voices dripping with arrogance. "We will ensure the records do not reflect our true transactions," unquote. The courtroom fell into stunned silence, murmurs rising in soft waves like a tide of disbelief. Even the elderly woman in the floral dress clutched her chest, whispering to her husband, "Can you believe this?" The shift in power was palpable. I could feel in the polish with the railing under my palms the subtle vibration from the hum of whispered conversations, and the clicking of phones recording every second. Lander's smirk had vanished, replaced by a tight jaw, his hands gripping the edges of his chair, the citrus leather cologne now almost suffocating in the charged air. I continued, presenting corroborating evidence, showing timestamps of Transactions $12,450 diverted to unauthorized accounts. Exact dates March 18th, 2019, July 24th, 2020, and November 2nd. 2021 highlighted in bright red annotations a gallery leaning forward, collectively gasping and murmuring again. The combination of detailed proof, meticulous documentation, and precise timing created a shockwave that no one in the room could ignore. I looked at Clara. She nodded quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook, the faint smell of chamomile tea still on her breath. A subtle reassurance in the midst of chaos, and as I paused for effect, the judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly now with genuine attention. The energy in the room shifted entirely from doubt to all the hidden power I had cultivated over decades of legal expertise, mentoring, financial acumen, and quiet influence now revealed itself with undeniable force. Every witness, spectator, and participants sensing the scale of error committed by Landers and the assistant DA. The realization hit Landers visibly as he muttered under his breath, "This can't be happening." At exactly 11:44 a.m., he reached for the documents, trembling slightly, his arrogance shattered by incontrovertible proof. The spectators filmed furiously, some whispering to others, "Share this. Everyone needs to see this." And I watched the collective astonishment ripple across the room, from the young law students wide-eyed in shock to the elderly observers clutching their hands in disbelief. The polished marble floor under my shoes felt grounding as it affirming the legitimacy of every document, every annotation, every meticulous hour spent preparing this case. The revelation of power was not sudden in execution, but cumulative in its effect. Decades of underestimation, financial and personal sacrifices, mentorship, and quiet influence converging into a single undeniable moment. And as I concluded with a calm but firm tone, "Judge Harris, I submit that justice requires immediate correction." The gallery erupted in whispers and clicks, phones held high, capturing every second. The faces frozen in awe, some gasping, others shaking their heads in disbelief. And I whispered quietly to Clara, "They will never forget this." She nodded, the air charged with a mix of relief, shock, and vindication. The opposition, once smug, now utterly exposed, the evidence undeniable, the dynamics of authority irrevocably transformed. And if you have ever experienced the satisfaction of revealing hidden strength and power after years of being underestimated, share this moment with someone who needs to see it, because the shock, the validation, the revelation is worth witnessing. And as I glanced across the courtroom, every person frozen, every recording capturing every expression, I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. The power shift complete, the truth undeniable, the stage set for justice to follow. And the next chapter would reveal the immediate consequences of this revelation and the justice executed in real time. By 11:55 a.m. in the downtown Savannah courthouse, the energy in the room had shifted completely, the polished marble floors reflecting the stunned faces of spectators, the faint aroma of coffee from the morning mixing with the sharp smell of ink and paper glue from the documents still in my hands. As Judge Harris finally spoke, his gavel lifted precisely at 11:56, and the echo reverberating off the wood panel walls commanding immediate attention. I presented the evidence calmly, as before, but now every word carried the weight of undeniable proof. The judge's voice firm now, stating, "We will immediately place Mr. Landers under review and freeze all accounts related to Thompson estate." The gallery collectively gasped, the murmurs rising to whispers and soft exclamations of disbelief. A young man filming on his iPhone whispered, "Everyone saw that the correction is happening." The sudden reversal was palpable. Landers' face drained of color, his hands trembling slightly, gripping the edges of his chair. The citrus leather cologne now almost suffocating in the charged air. I could feel the texture of the courtroom folders beneath my fingers, grounding me as the scale of immediate justice unfolded before everyone's eyes. At exactly 11:59, and a court clerk announced a reversal of the previous mismanagement rulings. All unauthorized transactions were frozen, totaling $87,342.16 over 36 months. The gallery erupted in quiet murmurs, some filming, some whispering, "Share this with everyone. This is unbelievable." The faces of elderly observers registering relief, some with tears welling in their eyes as justice was finally enacted. The assistant DA attempted to intervene, but Judge Harris silenced him, saying all corrective actions will proceed as outlined. The courtroom seemed to exhale. Collectively, the polish would under my palms warm and firm, providing grounding in the midst of a whirlwind of transformation. The humiliation, once directed at me, now completely inverted, the arrogance of Landers. replaced with visible panic and disbelief as colleagues whispering among themselves in hushed tones of documentation I had prepared with such precision, now acting as the instrument of real-time accountability. And as I presented additional notarized contracts showing exact dates March 18th, 2019, July 24th, 2020, November 2nd, 2021, the gallery leaned forward, collectively gasping some whispering to others, "This is insane. The employees responsible for mismanagement facing immediate corrective." Measures financial restitution of $12 for $150 in mandatory audits over the next 12 months. The smell of coffee still lingering, faintly mixing with polished wood and paper glue, creating a sensory imprint of justice being served. I watched the reactions of the spectators, the elderly woman in the floral dress, shaking her head in disbelief, whispering to her husband, finally, the humiliation of years reversed, and the support of witnesses, and the public now fully behind me, cameras recording. Every second of the reversal, the clerks executing directives, precisely as documented every transaction, verified in real time. Landers finally muttered under his breath at exactly 12. For PM, this can be happening, the realization of accountability hitting him like a physical blow. The gallery collectively filming, capturing every moment, some whispering marks, someone who needs to see this, the air thick with a hum of recording devices, every observer feeling the satisfaction of justice unfolding before them. My own heartbeat steady calm, yet exhilarated, knowing that every detail had been planned and executed flawlessly. The polished marble under my shoes and the tactile sensation of the folders under my fingers grounding me as the consequences of years of preparation and perseverance manifested in real time. The spectators whispering and clicking cameras, creating a collective resonance of justice, the reversal of mismanagement, not just symbolic, but quantifiable. Every cent accounted for, every misstep corrected, every injustice addressed. The room buzzing with energy as the gallery absorbed the humiliation of the antagonist. Landers visibly shaking, the texture of his chair pressing into his palms, a stark contrast to my composed posture and calm delivery. The assistant DA, now silent, witnesses nodding in acknowledgement of the transformation. And if you have ever experienced the satisfaction of seeing accountability executed in real time, share this story with someone who needs to witness justice, because the impact, the reversal, the transformation is undeniable. And as I glance across the gallery, every face frozen in shock and every camera capturing the revelation and reversal, I knew that the next chapter will be the final reflection of transformation and universal lesson drawn from decades of dedication, perseverance, and strategic execution. The energy in the room now settled into a tangible sense of closure. The polished floor reflecting the expressions of astonishment and relief, and the faint scent of coffee and ink marking this moment forever as a turning point in not just my life, but for every observer who had witnessed justice in motion. By 12:15 p.m. in the downtown Savannah courthouse, the energy had shifted from tension to quiet, all the polished marble floors reflecting every face of astonishment, the faint aroma of coffee from earlier still lingering, mingling with the subtle smell of ink and polished, with the gallery leaning back, slightly processing the whirlwind of events, the weight of decades of humiliation and persistence, finally culminating in justice and revelation. I stood with my palms resting on the smooth edges of the railing, feeling the tactile reassurance of the polish, with beneath my fingers the soft hum of recording devices and whispers creating a rhythm that mirrored my own heartbeat, steady calm, but filled with quiet satisfaction. I looked around at the faces of spectators and witnesses, the elderly woman in the floral dress now smiling, softly clutching her hands in relief, whispering finally to her husband, finally my assistant Clara, standing beside me, notebook in hand, her fingers brushing the smooth leather edges, tracing the texture, almost as if grounding herself in the reality of what we had accomplished. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, decades of dedication beginning in 1993 with $5,000 in savings, opening a small law office on 12th Street, Savannah. The smell of fresh paint and sawdust in that first office, the aroma of coffee from the cafe across the street. Each client helped, each pro bono case meticulously prepared, the $21,763.84 invested over 3 years into preparing this specific case, the countless hours mentoring young lawyers, a subtle act of generosity unnoticed by many, yet forming the foundation of the hidden power. I now wielded every slight, endured every humiliation experience now crystallized into understanding and strategic resilience. And I whispered to myself aloud, quietly, so Clara could hear it. This is what persistence looks like. She nodded slightly, her lips pressed together. A subtle smile, acknowledging the culmination of decades of careful planning. The gallery now buzzing softly, some filming, some whispering, share this. Others capturing the moment to remember the reversal of humiliation and the triumph of meticulous preparation. I spoke to the room calmly, but with warmth. Your honor, members of the gallery and observers, I hope this demonstrates that dedication, integrity, and patience are never wasted, that even in the face of repeated underestimation, justice, recognition, and transformation are possible. The spectators nodding, some murmuring softly, the energy in the room palpable. The polished marble under my shoes grounding me in the present, the faint aroma of coffee and paper glue marking this day as unforgettable. The antagonist Landers, now seated silently, shoulders slumped, a stark contrast to composed dignity of decades of preparation, a reminder of the consequences of arrogance and dismissal. Every witness, every observer, every recording capturing a story, not just of legal correction, but of human perseverance and empowerment. I address the audience directly, and if you have ever been underestimated, ignored, or dismissed, let this story remind you that your patience, your preparation, and your quiet resilience hold power. Share this story with someone who needs to see it. Mark someone who needs to remember that justice and recognition can come. And I continue reflecting on the personal transformation, not just a legal victory, decades of learning, sacrifice, mentorship, and emotional investment converging into a moment that forever changed how I perceive my own worth and influenced the gallery, absorbing every word, hum of whispering devices like a soft echo of collective understanding. I emphasize finally that growth, recognition, and empowerment are lifelong journeys that require patience, strategy, and integrity. The polish would under my palms and the tactile sensation of the folders grounding me as I concluded. And everyone watching, if you have felt invisible, undervalued, or dismissed, comment below, share your experiences, engage with the story, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell for more stories of perseverance and transformation. Let us build a community of support, reflection, and growth together. This is not just my story, but a story for anyone who has felt underestimated. The polished marble reflecting the collective realization that patience, preparation, and integrity ultimately prevail. The gallery exhaling collectively the faint aroma of coffee and ink embedding itself as a sensory memory of transformation and empowerment. And I ended softly, but firmly, knowing that the lesson was clear. Resilience matters, strategy matters, integrity matters. And every observer present would leave with the undeniable understanding that nothing can diminish the value of quiet, persistent power. And I whispered internally as I straightened my posture and looked around the gallery, the final words of the day etched in my mind and heart: remember your worth, because one day the world will see it. And the camera captured every expression, every whispered exclamation, and every subtle smile, forever documenting that transformation. The story complete, the lesson universal, and the channel now connected to viewers ready to reflect, engage, share, and grow together.